weaving studio, which Susan leads. We also have the other long-term partner we have is the Vermont Weavers Guild, who has their library with us. And that's where their monthly meetings are held, and workshops, and and we're very thankful for that partnership. With me coming in, I've also started regular programming, so we do a lot of art and craft education programming, mostly for adults right now. A lot of it does, I look to local artists in Vermont and through our network, sometimes elsewhere, but largely focusing on traditional crafts. We are starting to branch into youth programming, which I'm very, very eager to do. I'm born and raised in Randolph, Vermont, and just came back, and through the opportunities that I had as a child, I've been able to pursue my career in arts management, and so I really want to make sure that the next generations have those exposures to the arts and are able to kind of see their passions through, and creating opportunities for them to engage with different forms of art. And I mean, I was first introduced to weaving when I was a young child with my aunt, and so being able to bring that to people who are both revisiting their practice in fiber arts, but then also introducing it to new is very exciting. And Susan and I are actually at an interesting point where we are starting to talk more about what are we doing with the weaving studio? What is the direction of it? We've noticed a groundswell of interest with a lot of people that are stepping forward, interested in learning the craft for the first time, or just starting to pick it up again. And so, yeah, we're starting to have these conversations about what does the future look like, and how do we grow this and sustain it, and also create partnerships that reinforce that. So, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, my name is Susan Rockwell, and I've been teaching at the Craft Center since 2002. And it's amazing. It always amazes me that there are so many people who want to learn to do weaving, and as well as other crafts, because we all know that when people work with their hands, it's very soothing to them, and it's very a restful kind of thing. And so over the years, I mean, we've had a lot of different weaving students, and now, as with Jessica doing all of the other crafts that the Craft Center is involved in, more and more students are coming in. I've also worked at the Craft Center with autistic students, and it's just so heartwarming to see them get into weaving and just take to it so well and be so enthused and involved in it and concentrating on it. It's just incredible. I also, as Jess mentioned, we are trying to sort of revamp the weaving studio, because we've had a group of weavers who've been coming in on Fridays, but we want to make the studio available all during the week so that the weaving studio is available to anybody on any day. And so we're beginning to get more people interested and more people coming different times of the week, which is really encouraging. And so I also have been teaching, various guilds around New England, and also teach at the Fletcher Farm School of the Arts and Crafts in Ludlow, Vermont, which is a really old craft school in the state. So it's really exciting, and it's like, what else could I do that's my passion? And it's which is a real it's a real gift to be able to do something that's your passion and make some kind of living a little bit at it. So it's been really exciting, and it's really been great to have Jess come along too. And just before the pandemic, I had students who learned to weave just before the pandemic, and they were so thankful that they had something to be doing during the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, I've had a lot of students come in and say, well, I want to learn to weave because I've always wanted to do it, and I don't want to be caught again. So I'm gonna weave. So it's been really great. And Jess mentioned too the fact that it is an old building, and when we started out revamping that building, it took years. It actually took years to it had no insulation in it or anything. And when the Weavers Guilds first started meeting there, we wore our coats and long underwear to the meetings, during the meetings, because it was so freezing. And just over the years, it has been just renovated so nicely, and it is such an incredibly beautiful building. And now it's just, I think only the front porch is basically what needs to be, shored up. So it's just such a gold mine there in that little town. So it's exciting. So if you ever have a chance to come and visit, you should do that.
Thanks, Susan. Jess?
My name is Justin Squazzaro, and like a lot of people we've heard from so far, I have a whole bunch of hustles that pay the bills. But probably you'll want to hear from me because I'm a professional hand weaver and the lead instructor at the Marshfield School of Weaving in Marshfield, Vermont. The weaving school was founded in the mid-1970s by Norman Kennedy, who was born in the 1930s in Aberdeen, Scotland, and he learned textile making from people who had done it there either professionally or learned from people who had learned in that sort of world of textile making. So we teach a sort of traditional way of working that really dates back to when the horizontal loom was introduced into Europe during the Middle Ages. Tends to be quite a bit different than the way that a lot of hand weaving is practiced nowadays in the United States. And we are primarily concerned with preserving that, not to sort of recreate some historic moment, but because it persisted for as long as it has, because it's incredibly ergonomic and efficient and good at what it does. And we want to make that available to people today and in the future. And I don't know how much more you want me to elaborate on any of those things. But
Did you learn to weave at Marshfield, or did you already know how to weave when you came there?
I wove on my own for a while and sort of got some information from some books and a few friends who wove a little bit, but I showed up at Marshfield and I realized I didn't have any idea what I was doing as soon as I was in the presence of people who really did, and really perfected and honed my technique there. I've been especially interested in better understanding the way that hand weaving was being accomplished in the 18th and 19th centuries, mostly because that's when we first really get really explicit information about how that was being done. We could piece it together before that from some sources, but it's, we have all of these fantastic texts from that period that really give you a clear understanding of how people were able to produce all of the textiles in the world entirely by hand, without any sort of auxiliary power to accomplish that task. And some of the finest textiles we will ever see accomplished that way. And so I've been interested in sort of understanding that better, to sort of help rebuild a link to that real wealth of human knowledge and experience.
Who would you say, and then really I have this question of all of you, what majority of your students who come to learn to weave are hobby weavers, and are any professionals, or do you stay in touch with your students once they go beyond you and they're people who are actually trying to make a living somehow in the textile world that you know of as the years go by? I mean, I know Kate came to take a class with Norman in the late 70s. That's when I first knew Kate. We were waitresses together in Boulder, Colorado, before either of us started weaving. And I took a class with Deborah Chandler, and Kate came east to take a class with Norman, and she just never left.
Right. I have no idea, we're terrible at data collection, so I can't tell you an accurate, percentage or anything like that, but a lot of people, I think, continue to pursue it to some degree. Whether or not they're making an appreciable amount of money off of it, I can't really say, but certainly there's something about the attitude that is quite different amongst a large group. I could ask two of our audience members, Marion and Becca. What do you guys think?
Have we made any money off of our weaving, or would we want to?
Those things. as two people who have been to Marshfield.
I mean, I grew up in New Hampshire but was living in Portland, Oregon until last spring. So I literally moved to northern Vermont to go to the Marshfield School of Weaving and have basically relocated my life to be in proximity to that school because I want it to be what I do as a living. I have other thoughts on how financially accessible craft education is, but what I want to learn is there, and I would like to learn as a long-term student, not as a hobbyist.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I definitely found kind of a similar thing to you. I changed a lot of my weaving practice after going to Marshfield, and I still retain a lot of kind of the techniques that Marshfield teaches in my own practice. My goal is to somehow work in the textile industry in some capacity at some point, but I'm not there yet.
So maybe step number one is from being a hobbyist, which means just making stuff for yourself and your family gifts, to feeling like your work is good enough that you could try to sell it to people who you don't even know.
Right, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that my path includes selling my work, but in some kind of tangential way, be connected with it.
Well, then let's let Chick tell us about Harrisville, because you've been at this for a long time too.
Yeah, I'm Chick Colony, and I started Harrisville Designs in 1971. And we ran our first weaving workshop in the fall of 1971. We've been running classes ever since. It's a small part of our business now, but it's an important part, and we've always I've always had the attitude that if we're gonna sustain these crafts, like weaving and spinning, we better have good instruction so that people don't get discouraged. And I've seen all kinds of different teaching techniques. We've tried hard never to hire employees as teachers or customers as teachers, because we like to rotate our teachers and keep it changing so that people come back. And if you tell your best customer, no, you can't come and teach anymore, it can affect the rest of your business. Employees, you hurt their feelings if you think, you know, they don't really know how to teach, but they want to. So we've seen a lot of different kinds of teaching. A few teachers, which we never asked back, would spend a whole week on a beginning weaving class teaching them the vocabulary of weaving and a loom, and this is a treadle, and that's a shuttle, and they never really got to the weaving part of it. And so we've tried to strike a balance between passing on the knowledge so that a person can, in 30 hours of instruction, go home and actually weave and enjoy it, and not feel that they're going to join a sweatshop or something. And it's been successful. We have between 200 and 300 students a year. Mostly we started with summertime 5-day classes. Now we have a lot more smaller classes because we do some instruction in knitting and surface design, spinning, and they sometimes don't sustain themselves for 5 days as well. But we have students from all over the country and all over the world sometimes. We don't jury the students, we just take whoever signs up, and we've been very lucky, but I think our reputation is such that people know what kind of class it's going to be. And we've been fortunate to get really good students. The instructors, as I said, we keep changing, but the beginning weaving instructors are the most important for us because that's our market, is getting people into weaving. And we want to be sure that whoever's doing it is doing a good job. And we have gone through a number of people over the years, but they've tended to stay a lot longer than I'm implying. We don't turn them over every year. A woman named Rachel Emmons from Maine taught for a long time for us. She was really a good teacher, very solid. After her, Deborah Chandler came and taught 2 weeks every year or 3 weeks every year. And we let her do the beginning weaving. She was famous for having written sort of the best foundational book for weaving. After Deborah stayed in Guatemala and didn't want to come here anymore, we started working with Tom Gibson, who was from Goffstown, and he's a Navajo weaver actually, but he's a professional weaver on the side making shawls. And Pat, my wife, talked him into taking on our beginning weaving, And for 20 years, he taught all our beginning weaving classes, and turned out to be a terrific teacher. He just retired last year. And so we have two people now sort of vying for the position. They're both from North Adams, that area. One is Lisa Hill, and the other is Megan Carlin, and they're sort of sharing that responsibility now. Most of our students are hobbyists. And getting back to this whole question of not many people can make a living weaving. Tom Gibson did it, you're doing it. But I always tell people, you're gonna get a lot of things out of weaving, but a livelihood probably isn't gonna be that, because you just can't weave that fast. And if a heavy teaching load and weaving on the side, the way Tom did it, actually has worked. He sustained himself as a professional weaver, but not many people can do it. Most of our students now are older. They've come from, I wove during the 70s when it was a counterculture thing to do. Then my family and my career interfered, and now I'm retired, and now I can really come back and weave, and they're wearing a lot of that revival weaving. Our weaving studio is set up for basically 12 to 15 students at a time. I've learned over the years that it's important to have enough students so that they have to work together. You have to stress the teacher beyond what they can do. Otherwise, the students don't talk to each other, don't learn from each other. And a small class of 5 or 6 students leaves it all up to the teacher, and it's not as good an experience, in my opinion. So we try to have 12 students in most of our classes. The studio, we keep open 24 hours a day for students, because many of them are away from their families or their careers for the first time, doing the thing that they love most, which is weave, and they'll weave 18 to 20 hours a day just because they can, and that's worked out quite well. We try, because we're always bringing teachers in, we don't let the teachers stay with the students. I try to keep teaching's hard, it's a lot of work, and they don't want to go home and drink wine with the students, only a few of the students, because they can't all be in one place. It just disrupts the class too much, so we've always been careful about the housing to get the teachers on their own, where they can rest. One of our failures is that we don't reach out to children as well as we should. We can't even get our own little elementary school interested in doing it, and that's partly their problem as it is ours. I'm personally very interested in what I'm finding out people call experiential education. And I don't know, maybe it's because we grew up with Spin and Marty or something like that. I want to get a sheep farm attached to the business and have middle school children come and stay for 2 weeks at a time and learn about sheep husbandry and how you run a farm and also how you weave. It's pie in the sky. We don't have a farm and don't have any sheep, but we really would like to do it, and I think it's exciting, and I think it's a good thing for education. And people are starting to do that more, send kids out on, not camps, but focused activity. And I think we could offer a really good program. I like the teaching, and I think what it brings to the public is we all have some, I think, abilities to create with our own hands, although we live in a culture that discourages it. And I think it's always great when I see people come with no confidence in their own abilities at all, blossom out during the week, and by the end of the week, they're really proud of what they've been able to do. So it's been an important part of our business, and I like doing it.
One thing I'd like to mention is that Rachel Emmons, actually, there have been 3 times in New England that there has been a really intensive course of at least 2 weeks for one summer, and then some homework during the year, and then another intensive, 2-week intensive the next summer for people who wanted to either become professional weavers or who wanted to teach weaving. And Rachel taught one of those classes, and Nell Zamorowski taught the first one, and I think Naomi Towning taught the second one. And the last course like that was in 1993. So it's really time for another course like that if somebody was interested in.
I
You
think
know.
Leslie Waters was involved in that too.
Yes, she was, yes. And a lot of the people that were in the class that I was in did become professional weavers or became instructors. And it was, you know, it was really good. It was just such a good way to, and also, we were younger then, and we were all young people.
Yeah.
So, you know, and many of those people are still doing professional weaving or teaching. But I think it would be good if we could get something like that going again.
In the early 70s when we started, it was more of a experience thing. People wanted to just be there, someone play the guitar, someone else playing the fiddle, and everybody's having a good time, and at the end of the week, they went home and hadn't really learned anything. And they started to complain to me about, you know, this is really fun, I like being your butt. And so in the middle of the late 70s, we started to get more serious about content, where people really wanted to learn, which was less of a lifestyle thing and more of a, oh, this is what I want to do. So we saw little changes there.
So I think this is actually a good time to pose a question to you all, and I'm aware of the time, we have 20 minutes, and so I want us to be able to come back to the breakout session after this with some points to mention. What really strikes me is that we have, you represent teaching very different audiences, different age groups, whether we're talking about hobbyists or people aspiring to be professionals or children and doing outreach. And so the question that we have is, how might the fibre shed support what you do, whether that's with recruitment, whether it's questions of access and providing funding for students. What kind of visions might you have for how the Northern New England Fibre Shed can support you and your students?
Money.
Funding,
We,
yeah.
one of the things that we've been really fortunate to have in the last couple of years at Marshfield is a entirely just donor-supported scholarship fund. And some years there's a lot of money to give out, and some years there's not. But I would say that, again, we're terrible at data collection, so don't quote me on these sorts of things. But I think our demographic has dramatically shifted since that became available. What we've been doing basically is just offering half tuition for classes, and especially for young people, and especially in this economy, the ability to take a week off of work and travel to the middle of nowhere and find lodging and pay for a class that is not the most expensive out there, but it's also not cheap because the overhead's high and good instructors cost money. Having that scholarship fund has just opened up a whole new world of people to attend. So I don't know if there's any way to pool that and have something that the Fibre Shed can do for the region, to send people to any of these programs perhaps, but it's just so hard otherwise, I think, for people to get away and get access.
I think helping to advertise too, different places that do teach, would be really helpful too, because I have students that are coming from a long distance sometimes to teach that, you know, and it's hard for them to come that kind of a distance. So, because I don't teach I don't teach where there's lodging available for the students. So, you know, sometimes people are driving a couple of hours to get to me for an all-day class, and then driving home and coming back the next day. I mean, it's, you know, which is difficult. So.
And also just raising awareness as well, because I think, both in terms of marketing and scholarships would be huge, and just funding for our program as well. So much of what we offer at the Craft Center is building a community, like an immediate community around craft and around weaving, with the Weavers Guild and with our weaving group, and then the outreach and building we're trying to do with that. I also, in our conversations about what we're doing the next couple of years, like I would really like to start making more stronger external partnerships and relationships with different, we're in an agricultural state. I would like to make stronger relationships with people who are providing the fiber and farms and whatnot. So I think that would be huge, and create a real ecosystem around that, a very intentional one. So I think there's just so many untapped opportunities in front of us that I think having this conversation, being a part of this network will only add to that, so that's what I'm really looking forward to.
I think to add to that, that's definitely one thing I had already thought of, connecting fiber artists to the farmers. But one of my really long-term goals at the League is to somehow promote more sustainable craft practices. And so to be able to connect all of our professional fiber artists to various farms. And League members can be within 10 miles of the New Hampshire border, so we have people in Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts. So we really cover quite a large area. And another thing I'm trying to do, kind of what you were saying, is connecting with other organizations. I want the League to be a resource. So I've been working with the guilds from around the state, like the New Hampshire Weavers Guild, the New Hampshire Spinning and Dyeing Guild, and then we have others, Woodworking, Pottery Guild. But to come to the League for whatever resources for fiber, it could be are there any local farmers that are growing flax or that have sheep, and then somehow they could get that stamped on their work that it's been more of a local process. I think that would be incredible.
I mean, I think I would echo a lot of the things that everybody just said, like access to scholarship money and advertising support and all of that. And the only things that I would add, I mean, I think everything that everybody said was awesome. The only thing that I would add is like the sort of conversation that we're having right now feels really like we're learning from each other. We're like helping one another not to reinvent the wheel in all these different places, and that feels really helpful. And I feel like another thing that seems like good and sort of in a networking kind of community building way is like more connection with schools or more connections with kiddos wherever they are, And another thing that I keep thinking of is the project that you're doing, Justin, with processing a whole bunch of local fiber, you have an exhibit A.
I couldn't be here for the rest of the day because of a little farming thing, but this little thing has just crossed state lines for its first time ever.
Wow.
So this is a prototype. It's pasted together because our tailor's super busy. I haven't even seen it. So wool from East Montpelier, natural sheep colors, and then a little bit of it naturally dyed, spun at Green Mountain Spinnery, woven by hand by Dosha, my colleague, at Marshfield, and then tailored in East Montpelier by one of our wonderful.
So is this going into the design competition?
Maybe the first.
This is hopefully this will be sold and gone by then, and it'll be one of many, but perhaps.
This is a prototype, so there will be more?
Yes, and they won't be pasted.
Well, I think
They'll be actually sewn, but
It's
they're
the
all
first
work
entry
packages.
into our fiber shed design.
Little spin around, there's a little detail on it.
There is.
There
Oh,
it is.
like-
Look at that.
Now it's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
So, stay tuned.
Beautiful.
Order yours now. Or- Sorry, that's my shameless plug. Just put that.
Will it have buttons?
Back here for now. I think it'll have buttons. I honestly haven't the slightest idea. We trust our tailor, she's real good. So I think it'll close somehow. You look at it later. Anyway, craft schools, let's talk about craft schools.
So what I was thinking about is like, how hard it is to get a quantity of yarn spun, or how expensive it is to get a quantity of yarn spun, but like thinking about what you're doing, thinking about the Hudson Valley Textile Project, like groups of people coming together and getting a bunch of fiber processed from East Montpelier, for example, or from, the Northern New England Fiber Shed region, or, 5 farms come together or whatever, and be able to get it processed, at Green Mountain Spinnery or somewhere where there are higher minimums than like maybe Junction, and but also brings down the cost a little bit. And just like being able to do like that little bit of like coming together to do that sort of stuff might be useful, might not, I don't know. Yeah,
Like aggregating demand.
maybe, yeah.
Can I add something from the student
Yes,
perspective?
yeah.
I, like I said, moved here a year ago, and I haven't heard of like half of the programs. So I think even just like centralizing the resources would be really helpful in terms of just like looking for places to learn. And I could foresee some sort of like mentor apprenticeship matching system going on the Northern New England Fibershed website. Because as someone who's like maybe a bit beyond beginner, I'm looking for like a longer term education that is affordable, which isn't always ad hoc classes. So anyways, I'd love that if you guys.
Thinking about the apprenticeship program that you were talking
Yeah,
about
I am
in
further
Maine
than 10
and
miles
New
from New
Hampshire.
Hampshire,
And
unfortunately.
but the Vermont the apprenticeship program through the Folk Life Center. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
I did not get it last year. I
Oh.
applied. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the apprenticeship is only open to New Hampshire and Maine residents, is that true?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, but maybe we could partner up with Vermont, with someone else in
Yeah.
Vermont.
Yeah, the Crafts Council or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's been interesting working with another statewide craft organization. And the apprentice receives $1,000, so to buy any tools, any materials, and then the mentor is paid $3,000 for the education component. So it's pretty cool.
It's awesome.
Were there other suggestions or questions from the audience, whether that's as teachers or students, producers?
Ideas of, when we look to the future, what does the future need that education can supply to further what we're doing?
I have another idea.
Um,
Sorry. I mean, I think another opportunity to make it affordable is using the college model, because there are ways to get grant money or loan money like you would to go to a traditional college. So in terms of schools, like offering semester-long education or putting it in a way where lending entities understand that this is like a long-term commitment, not just like a one-week class. I think that helps create access to that funding in a different way that doesn't come from, just donation-based scholarships.
And do you know of situations like this?
In Vermont, we have something called VSAC, which I'm not sure what it stands for, but they fund things like there's a school called Yestermorrow that does like timber framing certificates. So they fund herbalism programs, which are like season long. So they have evidence, or you're familiar with VSAC?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
okay.
And they fund a lot of different, or you can get funding through them, whether it's loans or
What
grants.
does VSAC stand for?
Vermont.
Vermont Student Assistance Program.
Thank you.
I had it as a Vermont residents going to college.
Yeah.
Outside of the state,
Yeah, and my husband got a VSAC money to do a program out of state for hoof trimming cattle. I guess it's that.
Yeah.
If that's anything anybody else is interested in. But and I know I have another friend who is doing an apprenticeship program, like teaching apprenticeship program that worked with VSAC to make sure that his program was able to be funded through VSAC. Is Marshfield funded through VSAC ever or no? I think it's possible, I think, to work with, like, even from a student perspective, to work with VSAC and with the organization that you're trying to work with, sometimes make it work.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything like that in other states too. But. Can I go back to your original question?
Yeah.
This is like, the thing that I think about, like where craft schools or craft education fits into this fiber shed, or fits into sort of like, the greater fiber world, regional fiber world, is, for me, I think about like just and I think I probably have maybe even said this before, like the reskilling of communities, and thinking about it beyond thinking about I know we have to think about sort of money a lot of the time, you know, but a lot of the feedback that I initially hear about locally produced textiles and locally produced food and locally produced anything, it's the first thing that people say is, but it's too expensive, you know, always, every time I have this conversation with somebody new. And my immediate like sort of gut response to that is like, it doesn't have to be about purchasing the fill in the blank, the sweater, you know, and it like in a sort of broader, bigger picture way, I think about, you know, when you're learning those skills that most people have had a lot of those skills throughout history. Someone in the community had the skills to make everything that you needed, you know, like it's like a part of a livelihood rather than like necessarily an exchange. And so, you know, like as a way to have a balanced, sustainable wardrobe or sustainable lifestyle, you know, I think being able to do some of those things yourself is part of it. You know, it's not the be all end all, and I know education is sometimes expensive also, but it feels like a really important part of you know, of the bigger picture. You know, we're talking about, you know, companies producing things more sustainably, and we're talking about upcycling and recycling and thrifting and all that stuff. I think part of the conversation, which is probably why everybody is sitting in this room, is learning how to do some of that stuff yourself. It feels like an important part of the conversation.
Any last thoughts or comments or things we didn't cover that you maybe wanted to raise or have been on your mind? Because we have 2 minutes.
So tough.
I think what I want to end with is just to let everyone know, the advisory board of our fiber shed is a invitational, or invite yourself to. It's an open body, and if anyone is interested in helping guide the future of the Northern New England fiber shed, then talk to me or Leah or Molly or any one of us who's been running around carrying chairs today. And we are just now embarking on a long-term strategic planning process. So it's really up to us. This is the first thing we've tangibly done as a fiber shed, is to hold this roundtable today. And it is just the very first, and here's Erica, who's guiding our strategic planning process. And for me, I mean, my whole life has been as an educator. People think of me as a textile person, but I've been a teacher all my life since I was 19 years old. And that's how I think about the future, is as a teacher. That this conversation is so important to anything that we go on and do as fiber shed. And I know that in terms of a maker, when people actually come to my studio and see what I do, then they're willing to pay. Sometimes they tell me I'm not charging enough. But if it's just sitting in a gallery with a price tag on it, why should they buy my work instead of something that comes from India that's a quarter of the price? I'm sure, Justin, you have a similar experience when people understand what you've done. And that's part of what we're doing as educators. Even if the people we're teaching are not makers themselves, it's so important for consumers to understand the many, many processes that we go through to make what we make, and to understand all of that. So I don't necessarily want to have the last word. I just wanted to say that. And, thank you all. And if you wouldn't mind carrying as many chairs as you could over